Great. So just you and I on the screen now, Luke. Brilliant. Thank you so much for joining us, Luke. And also thanks to everyone else for jumping in. I'm going to give a bit of a brief introduction to Luke, and then Luke's going to talk to us a little bit about his career and offer up some practical advice. But just for those of you that don't know, although I'm sure most of you will have heard of Luke or read up on him if you're joining us today. Luke's from Liverpool, and only last year Luke was with us at the Unity with a piece called Lost Boys, which was produced by the National Youth Theatre, of which, if I'm right, I think Luke's a former member. He's described as a northern playwright and has rightfully received some high acclaim for his productions and have been produced by a variety of venues. And Luke's going to tell us a little bit more about those as he describes his career. He's made a move from acting to playwriting and has some directing in there as well. And his journey is the most inspiring one to learn from. His plays are both entertaining yet also shine a light on bigger issues, as indeed Luke does as a person with great purpose himself on other platforms that he's access to. So undoubtedly there'll be some great practical tips, but there's also an opportunity to ask questions. So as Rach mentioned, there's the chat facility down the bottom. We'll ask some questions to start off with when we get to the questions that have already been posed to us. But if you've got anything that comes up to you as it comes along, do please just pop it in the chat, and then we'll get to those towards the end of the conversation once Luke and I have had a chat. So Luke, lovely to have you here. I wonder, might you be able to just share us a little bit about your career then, your career journey to date?
Yeah, sure. So like I started off as an actor. I was in National Youth Theatre, and then I went to drama school, came out of drama school, and like I guess I never thought I wanted to write. I always thought that like the idea of playwriting was about, you know, making big, good, well-made plays. That never really interested me. You know, I grew up going to the Everyman and seeing pantos and Northern Broadsides and Knee High, and that's what I thought theatre was. That's why I started doing it, because I was like involved in that world. I watched that world. Went to NYT and I did, just by chance, a show with Knee High, and then another like bit of like new writing at the Soho. But I still thought that like plays were something that was on the table for me. Then with the drama school, and the end of drama school, I was really lucky in that like I had this group of, so at the end of my drama school, they did this thing where they commissioned a bunch of writers to like write your end of year show, and then you do them. And it just by chance, like it was this like ridiculous array of awesome writers like James Graham, Phoebe Waller-Bridge, Phil Porter, Joel Horwood, Patrick Marber, who else was there? Ed Ham, Amy Rosenthal, like all these writers that were just like about 24 at the time, that hadn't really done much, but were going on to be these like mega superstars. And then at the time, there was a thing in London called Nabokov Arts Club, which was like a club night come theatre night. There's like a bunch of like hour long plays, bands, poetry, and then like a disco at the end to like 6 a.m. type thing. I remember going to that with a lot, and I was like, fucking hell, plays can be about things that we actually experience in our real life, and they can be fun. And for me, that's like a revolution. I was like, what the fuck? I was like, we can write about things that like we're all dealing with, and we can do it in like a way that we might actually enjoy watching, as opposed to being like good, you know. And then from there, as an actor, I was on a TV show for about 4 years, and I was bored. I wasn't really doing anything else, and I had a bit of cash. And I had this actor friend of mine who I just think is the best actor of all time. And at the time, she was finding it really hard to get an agent and start working. So I made a show with her, which was my first play. And just really luckily, no one came to it for 3 weeks. And then out of the blue, this guy turned up who was about like late 30s, early 40s, like Scouse writer. I'd never heard of him. And then he was like, oh, I think I really liked it. If you want any help, just let me know. So this guy just hooked me up with everyone. His name was Michael Wynn. I don't know if you've heard of him. And he was like, hooked me up with everyone. Just like hooked me up with everyone, and then never spoke to him again. I haven't spoken to him like 10 years. And that's how I started writing, really. But this show was really just like, the question was like, how can we make something that our friends will enjoy about something we care about? You know, I was really pleased because like I managed to start getting a few commissions and writing off the back of that. And the industry's changed so much since then that I don't think I would have had that opportunity now. And she is now like a BAFTA winning actor, so I'm really like buzzing off the whole experience. That was my like starting way into it. And after that, I was sort of like, to be honest, I got to a point in my career where I was like, I hate acting. I don't really care about any of this. So I think that I care about it if I don't care about me in it. Like if I fail now, then I'll just fail. So I'll just go on the plays and I'll just see what happens. And I'll just like try and be a bit shameless about it. And it kind of semi paid off. And from there, I did a couple of shows with High Tide, which like really poorly paid, but were quite good for my like exposure and meeting people again. And then around that time, I was in residence at Soho, or right attachment at Soho and right attachment at Liverpool, Everyman Playhouse. And I was really lucky that Lindsay, who used to be literary person that the Everyman, gave me this book, which was a John McGrath, A Good Night Out, and it just blew my mind. I was like, never really thought about theatre like that again. I was like, oh fuck, we can talk about massive things in ways you can really, really engage people with. And that's when I met Middle Child, who's the company I'm like a long-standing associate of. And we started making work together in Hull. I've been doing that ever since. That was about 5 years ago. And between that, I've done I got involved in making like work with real people. I saw this show called Minefield by Lola Eris, which was about the Falklands War, but done with veterans. And I was like, oh, fucking hell, like, of course, that like empowering communities to speak to communities is a useful thing to do. Of course, answer so many questions about like why my skill set is valid. And I went on to do a show called The Jumper Factory at the Young Vic, and a couple of other things with them as well. And I want to do more of it, but it's a really hard thing to try and find funding for. But yeah, so I was doing that, and then traditional plays. I've done a few at like Hampstead and Bush and Soho. But like I think what's interesting about like my journey is I don't really see that as a market. I don't really see that as like necessarily the most useful thing we can be doing as playwrights. But it is useful for exposure. It is useful for like get yourself taken seriously by the Arts Council, blah blah. But it's not for me the most necessary artistic work we can be doing. And I guess like recently I started doing like TV and film to try and earn a bit more money. But that's kind of my overview of my career so far, I think, in a nutshell. I say that not because I'm aware that my writing career hasn't been as traditional as other writers. Like I didn't write a play and the Royal Court did it and then the National did it and then blah 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 blah. Like it's very much come from like a place of like how can we talk about things in a fun way, and that's sort of been the way that everything I've done's been made since. I think it's just important to draw that differentiation. I've never tried to be a good writer. I've always tried to like do things that I think are important. I think that's fair to say. I think.
Brilliant. That's fantastic. You mentioned then about that you didn't sort of take a traditional path, like you start off in the studio, you get picked up by the Royal Court, upstairs, then downstairs, then the National Theatre, and so on. But your CV and your experience is littered with that sort of name throughout it, such as the Bush or Hampstead. But that doesn't really hold much sway with you as such. Is that because there's a level of why is that really?
The big thing for me is that like I don't think that there should be a perceived career path for success in theatre making. I think it's nonsense. I think like it's a hangover from the David Hares of the 70s, 80s, Simon Stevens, like this idea of success. It's not useful. Like this celebrate worship the altar of genius of playwrights is just pointless to me. Like we've got to try and elicit conversation in communities, and that's like what we've actively got to do as artists. That's the purpose of it. Now, the way that my involvement in those buildings has never been like, I've written this play, it's so important, you should do it. It's been like, I've done something and sort of wound up there. Like none of those buildings have ever commissioned me to make a main stage play or a studio play. Stuff I've done just has happened to be showcased there because they've thought that what we've been doing elsewhere has been relevant to their community. It's never been like, I've written this amazing play, I think we should celebrate Luke Barnes. It's been like the Bush we met. Well, that was a show I made in Hull, in a nightclub in Hull that just ended up there. The Young Vic, that was like, as I say, we worked with like real people. That was never a play. The Hampstead Theatre was a play that I made for Liverpool that we didn't end up doing there for many reasons that they thought was relevant to the community, that they just got hold of. And Soho was originally was a Edinburgh show that I made made it in London, I think, but made it with like a Liverpool crew. Like it was never like a here we are. this play is amazing. We must make it type thing.
Yeah. So that's interesting, because the way you talk about Simon Stevens and all those writers that maybe you sort of that people know of as they're growing up, and it seems like there's a hierarchy of, this is the writer, then it's the director, then it's the designer, and then the rest of the creative team. And sometimes an actor might be the one that usurps the whole lot, or not, depending on who you can get in the cast. Whereas it feels as if that's not the case with you. Is that the case then when you're working on your productions with other people, that there's a sort of lack of hierarchy in place in the rehearsal room, for example?
So like with Middle Child, I would say like that's genuinely collaborative, genuinely. I've had like processes that I feel like I've been like serving, like I've worked with like directors who are much more experienced than me, and I feel like I've got to impress you, or producers sometimes who are like, oh, what, try again. You're like, okay. So then this weird thing where you're like, I'm trying to like do a good draft to try and get a well done from a hierarchy. It's absolutely stupid. What I try and do as I've got older is to try and like alter my process to remind everyone that the purpose of what the project is always bigger than the group of artists. So like before I do anything, like I'll always say like, look, I want to do this because I think we need to have a collective conversation about this thing. That's why we're doing this. If we have a collective conversation about this thing, maybe this community can move on from this thing into like a slightly more loving and whatever the result is. And you pin that on the wall, like that's why we're doing this. And then we have a conversation. It's like, okay, so how do we achieve that goal? And that's why it comes about form comes from, and this comes about story, and then the politics of like how we do that comes from story. So like before we start anything, me, a director and a producer will already be like, we'll already be saying we're doing this for something bigger than us. And then every choice from that point on goes back to that thing. Like sometimes the necessity is like sometimes you have to have an actor in it who's a bit more high profile to try and sell tickets. Then you try and find people who just like are on board with the message and aren't bellends, and then suddenly the whole thing becomes like it's much more manageable. But I do genuinely mean it. Like I do think that like if you're working for an NPO organization and you're serving a community, you're a civil servant, and like your whole job is to like serve the place. It's never to serve yourself. If you want to serve yourself, you're going to be a reality star or something like this. Theatre shouldn't think like that. Like I think that's the I think every problem we have within the sector about like exploitation and abuse comes from egos. The whole thing comes from egos. The minute we let go of that, the better it is for artists, the better it is for art, the better it is for communities, the better we can spend money. Like the whole thing comes with dismantling the idea of hierarchy for me.
I'd agree in terms of ego as well. And also that sort of getting wrapped up in your own personal thinking, it doesn't bode well for collaboration and a creative spirit. But it sometimes takes people, there's either something that happens, not always a road to Damascus moment, but there's a moment where it's a transition. Can you look at a period in your career where you sort of transitioned into feeling that way? Or is that a sort of sense that you've had with you since being a child or a young adult?
It's interesting. Like as I said, I didn't know the Royal Court in London was until I was about 23. So I was never like part of my thinking. But I was working with Middle Child, and it was Lindsay giving me that book, The Everyman Was the Big Thing. So reading John McGrath, meeting Middle Child, and I was like, this is what we should be doing. Of course it's all about serving a place. Of course it is. Yeah. It has to be like what that was the moment. Like when I read John McGrath, when I met Paul at Middle Child, we started making stuff together. I was like, I couldn't really ever get in the idea of like public money being made for stuff that is just good. That feels nonsense to me. Yeah, like it just feels nonsense. And like there's a number of organizations that celebrate goodness or like excellence, and they do seem very aesthetically pleasing plays, and the actors do really well, really good emotional journeys. But I think a lot of them, I think, are culturally relevant to the places they exist in, and that's a failure for me, I think.
Do you ever can you ever enjoy a play that is a failure in those terms, but can you ever enjoy them for what they set out to do, or is that sort of beyond you because you see the waste of money and or the like, or a wasted opportunity?
I think there's two things. I think like I remember reading this thing. I think it might have been Stephen Fry said it at BAFTAs maybe. He was like, art's got two functions, which is to make you like look or make you turn away. Not turn away, sorry, make you look or distract you. And like distraction's fine because sometimes you just want to go and see Blood Brothers, right? That's absolutely cool. Have a great night out, go and see Hamilton, go and see, I don't know, something at the Royal Court, like whatever, like something that's like a good art. That's fine. That's a part of art as well. That's serving us in a different way. That's like giving us respite and mental health and all that. Like that's absolutely cool. What I think the shit point is like just thinking about plays purely in terms of being good. Like that is completely irrelevant to me. That's like it just feels so pointless because the things that I think are in the archaic canon of good are generally the things that would turn new theatre audiences off anyway.
Mm-hmm.
So like, yeah, that's just where I sit on it. And that's where I'm at the moment. I've been there for like the last 7 years. I might change my mind in the future when I get older, but I don't know. That's where I am right now.
Yeah, absolutely. Good place to be as well. Because you can see as well on your Twitter, but as well as in your plays on Twitter and so on, that you are advocating for change as such, and that's great. You spoke about earlier on about how you started off going to the Everyman and then enjoying plays, and then being at the National Youth Theatre, which led to then going to drama school and so on. There was a sense maybe of being on a journey of going into being an actor, then a writer, maybe a bit of directing, now television and film. And do you see yourself? Do you think to myself, right, that's where I want to be, or do you pretty much live for the moment and see what opportunities arise?
I mean, I've always said that like my ambition has always been to try and do the same thing I'm doing now, but with more money involved. You know, like I mean, like practically making money as a playwright is very, very difficult. Like to make it's not impossible to like make a living just writing plays if you limit your outgoings, but it is unstable. Whereas if you limit your outgoings, do an episode of television, a film and a play, you're flying. Like that's a lot of money. But like theatre alone is difficult to manage. So yeah, I think practically you've got to diversify. Directing I've done a bit of. I don't think I'll do that much in the future because it's a different skill set. And like I think people are just better at it than me, so they should just crack on. I mean, I don't know. Maybe I might change my mind, but right at the moment, I don't think I'm qualified enough to lead that in the way that the standards I would expect of a director to do. So yeah, that's I think living for the moment. My ideas of like moving forward are just about. I've never really had an idea of an end goal, to be honest. I've just like done the next thing I think should be doing because, again, like the idea of success in this industry is so warped that it leaves people like I'm trying to think of that's a way to put this, but it leaves people like achieving these goals and just feeling absolutely empty. They said this girlfriend and she was like, one day I'm going to be on that stage and then life will make sense. I remember she got this job and then she did it and I was like, you're still sad? Why are you still so sad? We broke up at this point. Like, why are you so sad? And she was like, oh, you know. And I was like, well, you know, you put your whole life building towards this moment, thinking this one thing will happen, make you happy. And then I guarantee it won't, because life's not like that. You know, life's about like feeling your way through shit and like realizing what you need in your existence. It's just like try and get through this unbearable barrage of shit that's existence. And eventually you find like cultivate a life that like makes you feel safe, comfortable. And then when that happens, you're like, okay, how can I be helpful and be active? And that's the place to make art from. It's not like I must suffer forever until I am, till I finally get that directing job at the, I don't know, X theatre. I mean, because when it happens, you'll be like, what next?
Yeah.
Just building on shit, sand. I'm just building a house on sand. Nothing's gonna fall. You know, I think the way around it is to say, look, I had this thought a few years ago, and I remember talking about a friend with it. It was like, why are we both so miserable? And I was like, because we're living on someone else's criteria of happiness. We're living again, and I don't mean to keep going him because I think he's a really helpful person, but like we're living on Simon Stevens' criteria for success. And like if you carry on doing that, you'll fail. You'll fail and be sad, or you'll succeed and you feel empty. You know, like surely we want to like ask ourselves a question, like in my life, in my day-to-day life, how do I feel like I am loved and feel safe and feel comfortable and stable, and then how can I do things that are useful in art? That's got to be the way around to thinking it.
That absolutely. I think it's fascinating when when one realizes this, that the criteria of others that is a measure of success isn't yours. Yeah. Then there's a sense of release and freedom that comes with that.
completely. And it sounds so simple, but like I've got friends who've driven mad over it, and they're still plodding on, like still like any day now my life will change and I'll be happy. You're like, it's not going to change.
Yeah. I love that, because you, as you say, you build it. I want to be this, I want to be that. When it arrives, you get, oh, that's it. And you realise that your happiness doesn't come from there; it comes from another source, as such. And
there's a great Oscar Wilde quote. He said, like, happiness is sailing to the island of happiness, getting there and realising it's somewhere else. And I was like, actually, it's about that journey of getting there. That's the important thing. And like, I did a show about 2 years ago with the National Theatre Connections, which is like the young people's festival at the National Theatre. And I was really interested in like how my experience as an adult, my experience of getting things wrong as an adult would be useful to ask for young people. So if you have that conversation when you're young, you wouldn't find it as miserable when you're older. Yeah. And I was like, I found it really interesting because like I started investigating happiness, and I was like, actually, like so much of it is about just like allowing yourself to breathe, be bored, like let your mind wander, like allowing yourself to be loved, like investing in things you think are bigger than you. Taking care of the small things, like all the, like so much of my journey with it was like letting go of like drink, drugs, sex as a thing, like letting go of competitiveness and just being like, what can I do? How am I useful? Where's my action lead me? Just like surrender from this like idea of what was expected of us, because it's so unuseful. It's perpetuated. It was for me now when I was at drama school, perpetuated through that. It's perpetuated in that like rat race in the cesspit of London. Like it was instilled in everyone, I must be the one that gets this, and then maybe I can walk into a pub and people will respect me. And you're like, actually, no, I don't think I respect people because they've had a play at a big theatre. I respect people because they care about something and want to see change, and they're doing something to change that. That's like, for me, what I value in people. I don't really care if you're famous. Really, I don't really care if you've had, because like 30 people aren't even fucking famous. They're just famous in a very, very small bubble. So yeah, that was like my journey with that. I think it's really important to remember that like your criteria for success is different than everyone else's. And it should be like, for me, it was like, if I can make a living doing this, that's a big fucking win for me. It's like, that's a massive win. That's like, I could die and be like, awesome, I've done that. That's brilliant. But like, the big thing was like, knowing that every project I'm doing must elicit change that I think the community needs to talk about. And like, if you look back at your career saying everything I've done, no matter how small it is or big it is, I'm always doing that, then it's time well spent. I don't think many writers can say. I think a lot of writers will say, but I did this, I was celebrated for this, and like, I don't know who they are. I mean, like, someone I really value is someone like, I don't know if you know Vinny Patel. He's like, he's a writer friend of mine. Like, I really value him because everything he does is like, I'm doing with the intent of changing this about my world, about the way people see me. And like, I really, really value that about him, and you can see it in loads of people. But I don't think that's true of the older generation of writers that are still knocking around.
It's interesting you mentioned Michael Wynne, which is a blast for me from the past, because I worked with Michael on a Frantic Assembly show many years ago.
Amazing.
And he's as a bloke, he's really, really funny, and I'm not surprised in the slightest that he showed such generosity of spirit to you. And do you feel that that's obviously something that's helped you then at moments in your career where you've been open, you've presented it, and it's invited others in to look at what you're doing, and then be able to offer some guidance, some advice? Have you ever had a similar situation where you've then stumbled across something yourself and felt so inclined to sort of give advice? I mean, I know you're giving this advice here, but had you had such a similar sort of experience with a young writer?
It's interesting. Not particularly, but yeah, not particularly. No, I mean, I've championed people to like. I've definitely championed people to friends of mine, but I don't think anything's come of it as yet.
But actually, Michael may not have known about the impact that he had on you, and I'm sure you won't necessarily then know the impact you have on others, because I've seen you at the theatre and places and so on, and you certainly go to a lot, which will be really encouraging then for the people that are creating work. So undoubtedly,
that's the whole game. I mean, take Liverpool for example. Like, I do genuinely think that if you want to make work for a community, you've got to engage with that community. A big part of that is engaging with the cultural life of it, right? It's not just like chatting to your mates. It's also listening to people who are nothing like you and going to whatever, Black Festival, our Arts Festival or whatever, and just engage with those stories, because how else can you have a clue what's going on in your world if you're not engaging with other people who want like use dialogue, right? It's really important. It's the whole game. I mean, like, cultivating audience is all about, it's not just asking people to come and see your stuff, it's also supporting other people when they're doing their stuff, right? And hopefully it's an exchange rather than a one-way thing, I think.
Yeah. And before we're going to come on to some questions, we've got some ones written down. I'll ask people to start populating the chat, although I can see one in there already. Just a quick question for me then. Have you any, I don't know if this is something that you can rattle off, but have you sort of 2 or 3 tips where you would say this is something that always helps me at the beginning of the creative process, or if I've got a block or something like that, or this is where I know this is a good idea to run with, or the like? Any specific tips?
Sure. The biggest, I know I said already, but the biggest thing is saying, I'm doing this for this reason in the hope this will happen. That's the biggest thing, because like every process you go, this is shit, I hate myself, I can't believe I've done this, I've embarrassed myself, I've embarrassed the producer, the director, word again. But if you remember that I'm doing it for this reason, that's what gets you through that bit. So you're like, I'll work through this, trust that we all want to do the best thing, because we're all doing it for this bigger reason. The second thing is, I think everyone in the world has a sense of how the world is failing. So we all know that. We might not articulate it in our heads, we can all feel it in our like palms, we can all feel it in our bodies. That's like, and everyone has that in them. It's how you articulate what that thing is, how that thing comes out. And sometimes it's like reading, you're like, fuck, of course it's that. It's like trying to articulate things. The starting place is like, trust your feelings rather than your mind. Let go of like what good is and trust what like what you're feeling, and that is a starting place. Articulate it, find what the hope is for it, and trust that, and just trust that. And then the next step is like articulating it, interrogating it, but start from there. If you can do that, then no one can ever tell you you're wrong, because you're like, I know this is true, and I know this is a problem. I know that me doing this is about more than me. So like, and then it helps so much when you approach producers or collaborators. You're like, look, you feel this too. We're in this together. This is worth doing. Trust me that we can get there together. And like, this isn't about me asking your permission to do a play. It's about asking if you facilitate a conversation that's bigger than us. Then we're on the same page. I think that's really, really important. And like the minute, if you start your relationships on those terms, then the whole thing becomes so much easier. The converse is like saying, when you go like, I want to do this play, what do you think?
Yeah, okay.
And they're like, it's fine, it's a play. they might understand what you've got to, you know what I mean? They might understand the thinking behind it, or the input, or the impetus, or like the care or the hope you want to see from this. They might just read a play and be like, it's a play. You know, maybe they'll get it, but like probably won't, because people are busy and whatever. But like if you start a process of being like, let's go on this journey together, let's achieve this goal in this specific place, in this time, for these reasons, then the whole thing, everyone's emotionally invested, psychologically invested, the whole thing becomes easy. We all want to make a good thing together. It's not about impressing people, it's not about being good, it's about achieving a goal. And that's the most important thing to learn. Because like, there's a point where, I've said it before, but like, you'll go, this is shit, and like people might lose faith in you, because they probably will. But if you know that you're getting through this for a bigger reason, then there's impetus to work through it. That's the key to the process. The first night, and you're like, we know why we're doing this. We all know why we're here. Let's do it. It's so much easier than, is this good?
Yeah. Fantastic.
I think.
That makes an awful lot of sense. And can I come on to some questions then? Some folks have asked. If that's all right. And then anyone else, if you just want to go into the chat and start populating with some questions. But we've got some ones that people have written in beforehand. So what is the most unexpectedly difficult aspect you've come across in your career? And how did you cope with that curveball, except for the current situation, in brackets?
Like, to be honest, like, if you're really like honest about it, it's like mental health. It's like when you get really depressed, and you're like, well, how am I supposed to fucking write through this? And I think the way to cope with it, I think it's like, for me, it's like just trying to work through that shit, and like trying to work to cultivate a life where that's, you know, to deal with that. I think that's the most unexpected thing for me, was like, how do you even begin to write stories when you can't even get out of bed? Was a really hard thing. I mean, that was a while ago for me now, but that was a massive curveball. The answer is like, you just got to ask those questions and cultivate a world in which you can deal with that easily. trying to think of other things that's like really throwing me on processes. I've had a few where like, actually, that's not really useful because that's just like people leaving and stuff. How do you deal with like difficult producers is an interesting one. Sometimes you get a job and you're like, fucking hell, they're an asshole and they just don't understand. I think the key again is to try and just like remind yourself that like you're doing it for this reason, and then eventually you'll come around, I think. I'm trying to think what else I've had like it's difficult. I mean, I failed on loads of levels and loads of ways, but like just like things happen that make things more difficult. I don't know.
So I think you shouldn't like there as well, especially as it's quite I can imagine being a writer, although you speak of it in really collaborative terms, it can be quite a singular pursuit at times, where you're having to pour it out onto either a piece of paper or onto a computer, or however you do it, through a dictaphone and all the like. But that's quite a singular pursuit, and you've got to get it from up here and here, and that's coming from you a lot of the time. Yeah. So I can imagine as well, as you've said, in terms of those days where or periods where you just don't even want to get up. So to sort of lock yourself away, could really be challenging. But I think also the key that you describe, not writing from ego, because ego is often the thing that can help us be in that darker place. So it sounds as if you've got quite a level pegging approach most of the time.
I'm working on it. I'm not there yet. I'm not like I've climbed the mountain yet, but I'm definitely trying to get up it. But like you're so right in that competitive thing. I mean, a big part of me, I lived in London for about 8 years, and then I came back about a year and a half ago, I guess. And like big part of me leaving London, I was like, I don't want to work like that. I want to work in a place where I can do the stuff I want to do, and then leave, and my life not be about that. So if you get consumed by the whole thing, then of course you're going to start going like, oh, if only the Royal Court loved me, then maybe. And like, it doesn't matter. Like if you live in if you cultivate a life where you've got friends and family, don't really give a fuck what you do, but you know you're being useful and you know you care about it, then that's manageable. But if you like, so what I noticed when I was an actor, it was like these people come into your life when things are going well, and they'd be like, "How is it going?" And you're like, "I haven't spoken to you in a while. Why have you arrived?" And you're like, "Oh, of course, just done this thing." And they disappear. And you're like, "Well, who the fuck's your mate?" You know. So that, okay. And like, yeah. Honestly, like it's just like for me, it's been a whole process of trying to like live a normal life.
Yeah. Well, on that then, so in terms of normality, there is a sense of having to build connections with people outside of our family and friendship links. And so the next question is, what do you recommend is the best way to build connections in the industry? And I suppose maintain those connections as well.
The big, I've got a friend of mine who's a writer. He's a whole-based writer, and I just fucking adore him. Like everything he says is golden. And he said this thing to me. He was like, the whole journey is about finding your tribe. And I was like, well, what does that mean? And he was like, well, think about it. It's like, why would you waste your energies trying to impress people who don't want to do what you want to do? Mm-hmm. I was like, fucking hell. Of course. It's like, find those collaborators. It's like, honestly, it's just a matter of like going to see loads and becoming a fan. And once you like see someone you're a fan of, just like tell them. It sounds stupid, but just like start the conversation saying, I think that was awesome. I think what you're doing on these terms is fucking mint. I think the same. I'd love to meet them and like see if there's a way, see if there's like a mutual thing there. We can find something to work together and just go for it. But the big thing is like going to see loads, keep supporting people and just staying in touch. You know, it's not like you're going, I've been to see one play at, I don't know, Theatre Clwyd, and now I'm going to make a play there. It's like, go there, see something. If you like it, let them know, stay in touch, be a fan, be a friend, and just like carrying those relationships, invite them to see stuff and you've got it and start an exchange, you know, like it's a long-term thing. And like chances are when you first make contact with like a company or organization, they're not going to commission you because A, they might not know you, B, they're a different cycle in their own development. But one day there might be the perfect thing when you go, fuck, I've got this idea, maybe it might be the thing with the Unity. And then maybe you take it from there, you know. It's a long-term relationship and there's no need to try and get it right off the bat. But the first thing to do is just go and see loads and like know what's going on and know what people want and care about and the way they talk about art and the way they talk about communities. And take it from there. Just become a fan. I mean, like, and don't waste time on things just you don't like. It sounds stupid, but like, there's no point trying to work people who you don't actually like the work of because it's going to end terribly, obviously.
And so then the next question then, it sort of follows on from that in a way, in terms of you mentioned it's good to be in touch with people. Is there anyone at a theatre, for example, that you mentioned Lindsay, the Everyman Playhouse? Are there people that you would recommend writers send their work to, particular roles in venues?
I'd always say look for the new works people, because like they're the way in for artists. And like, I mean, Frank at the Everyman, I think is fucking brilliant. I'm sure a lot of you know her. I don't know who, like Gillian, oh, she's left, hasn't she? I don't know who's at Jackie at Leeds, Paul at Hull. I think it's just find those people. Like, I know it's actually, just Google it, like have a look on the website and just like have a look. But it's always the new works person's the one. You write to ADs, but they probably won't get back to you because they're really busy and they haven't got the headspace, and someone's job in that building to talk to artists. So, you know, remember that. Like they're not there. They're not there to be a gatekeeper. They're getting paid to talk to you.
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
And it's like, and most people are fucking lovely.
Great.
Yeah, there's a few. Not.
How do you pick your projects?
And it's like it's like saying I feel in my fiber that we should talk about this, and then because like it's not it doesn't work. Like people don't come to you and say, well, perhaps occasionally, but very rarely someone will say, I want to do something with you. Go, you're like, well, fuck. That very rarely happens. What the normal way around is like maybe you'll meet someone and they'll say, let's do something together one day, and you'll be like, okay, cool. When the right thing comes, let's do it. And then you just live a bit and then see what feels right. And when it feels right, start that conversation. But again, it starts with feeling it and then knowing it. And once you like investigate that a bit, just come up with like a really, really vague one-page idea, which is like, I want to talk about this for this reason here. I think you're the person to do it with for this reason. This is my idea for form, maybe a vague story. And that's it. And just see what people think and start from that perspective. But like, it's really, really important that you try and articulate that in terms of social impact. Like, I want to do this because of this. And this is how the form should take place, because I think that that's me as an artist. And I think it's a good mix between you as a producer, that together we can make something that sits in the middle of those two things, to do this here. I think that's how you think about it. And like, it's really, really super practical, but it really helps in just solidifying what it is you want to do and how you practically find collaborators. Because the hard part of being a writer is you go, I think this is important, but am I shit? And am I the person to do this? Maybe they'd hate that if I said that. Oh my God, everyone hates me. I haven't even fucking said anything yet. Before you even put pen to paper with the whole mindset, you're convinced that everyone in the world hates you. And actually, if you go, I think this is important, maybe we could do this together. And you can say, look, if it's not for you, it's fine. We can do something else. It's not a problem. But as a starting place, what about this? I think that's practically how you do it. And be prepared for people to say no as well, because people probably do. People say no all the fucking time. It's not like once you get to a certain years of doing this job, people suddenly say yes to everything. Definitely 100% not the case. You've got to develop a thick, and like, but what's right, it'll be right. You know, you find you try, it'll happen. But, you know, but starting ideas from that place of like, this is important, let's go for it. It's probably what I would say anyway.
So that comes on to the next question. Is from Anne. As someone who has never written anything before, how do I put pen to paper? Is there a course that you might recommend, or do you feel that you've got the resources within you to achieve that?
So interesting. I think like, if you've never written anything, I think the first thing to do would be like, answer that question, like what it is you want to do and why you want to achieve it, and just put that on the wall and say, that's okay, remember that. The next thing I would say is just like, go and see loads and read loads and just see what you like and like what responds to you and like what you think you'd like to do, like formally. Like, I really want to do, for example, like I really want to write about loneliness, and because I think that we don't talk about it enough. Maybe we spoke about it, people feel less lonely. And I really just fucking love poetry, so I'm going to write this like piece of like one person gig poetry that's a story about that, and then that's your starting place. Stick there, and then the next thing is about the craft, like how you work out the craft of doing that. And if you're into like, I can send everyone the script on like story structure stuff that I found really useful. So story structure, and then just fucking have a go. Like, it sounds stupid, just have a go at it, finish it, and then find someone nice to do it with you and sort of like help shape up it and see where it goes. Like, the sad truth is you can't really teach writing. You've got to give it a go and feel your way through it. And like, it's interesting when you write, because I never learned writing. I just sort of like did it. And like, I realized that my strength isn't that I got bogged down in intellect. My strength was that like, I was an actor, I could feel what felt weird. Something felt weird, I just like tried to find a way to make it feel less weird. And like
Okay.
just trust yourself, like, because there's a million people who've done a university, a Red Vic, done the degree at Red Vic University, who will give you 7,000 spiels on the politics of story structure, but they can't write because they've blocked themselves with intellect. Like, actually, it's much easier to say, I would care about this, I like this, let's try and put those two things together and just give it a go. And then maybe I can get some help from someone in like just tidying up a bit and see where we are then. I think that's more.
You hinted at this when you were saying that when you came from it as an actor, and you were saying, this doesn't feel right. Are there any other, so Aisling asks here, can you share some advice based on your playwriting process? I wonder, that probably formed part of your process early on of not knowing whether it feels right. Does it feel more right these days as you go along, or is it a pretty similar process each time? Do you have to rip up a copy and then go back to it? Are there sort of stages for you?
It's always the same, and it's always degrading. That's the last thing. Like, honestly, I still do the same thing. I'll say, like, this is what I talk about. This is how I want to do it. This is a vague story, and I'll give it a go. And I'll write it, and I'll be like, okay, that's it. It's a mess, but it exists on paper. And once it exists, you can start to shape it, right? So, like, the big thing I learned as an actor was like those questions about stories. Like, the character wants this, they stop by this, they do this, right? So I do the whole thing. I break it up into sections. Like, I break it into scenes and then into like little bits in the scene. And I'll be like, I'll ask each question. I was like, do we need this little bit? Yes, no. If not, I'll just cut it. And 9 times out of 10, if you cut it, that answers the flow question. Just like cutting those little bits out answers the flow question completely. Break it into little bits that don't feel necessary, get rid of them, and the story just seems to fall into place. The second thing in that process is like trying to break it into actions and obstacles, which I probably can't talk about now, but like basically every scene, character wants something's in their way. So like you make sure that every scene and every little bit, the character's active, and that's basically it.
Okay.
And that's basically it. You know, if you learn the story structure, then it's just a smaller version of the story of the bigger story in each bit. I know I've got time to go into that, but like it is much more simpler than making it sound.
Okay.
And then each little scene's got a little story as well. And make sure every scene's got a story. And then the character's active. That's the flow question. So you've got why it's happening, you've got how it's happening, you've got a story, and you've got something that's sort of like streamlined. And then the next thing is just about like saying, okay, I read it and I don't find it weird. And that's a point where you share it with someone else. And you're like, and then there you go, I found all this shit weird. And you're like, of course. And then you have a conversation about it. One thing I will say, actually, if anyone's a director in the room that I think is really useful to think about is that, like, when you're talking about other people's scripts, you've got to remember you can never tell them what you think is right or wrong or good or bad. You've got to ask them questions, because the minute you start dictating someone the place to be is the your cunt. Like, you've got to ask a question. If I ask you, oh, do you think that maybe the way that this woman exists in this play is problematic? They might go, no, and here's why, and they're going to clear it up themselves. Or they might go, yeah, fuck, of course, clear it for them. Or they go, yeah, it's fine. And they're like, okay, but as long as you're clear, it's all right. As long as you can make it clear, it's fine. But what I can't do you is tell you what to do, because then you're writing it. I might as well be a writer.
Yeah.
You know,
that's really, I'm going to take that on board, because I can have a tendency to do that sometimes. When I've been a producer, that's often because you come to the work much later on.
Yeah.
As a producer, I like to be pretty hands-off and leave the creative team to it. But there'll come a point whereby I'm looking at it through an audience's eyes and thinking, we're going to get shut down for that, or that's not going to land. And so I find myself, I'm probably because it's the like final run through or something like that, I find myself having to be a bit more direct. But
then there's a time pressure, right?
Yeah.
It's like, if you're like, especially for like, if I was a first time writer and I had some gobby like 22-year-old Oxbridge boy being like, I just think that kind of it could be better. You're like, well, I don't understand what that means, you know, like, and then they're like, maybe there could be a dragon in Act 3, and you're like, why? That kind of like, it's so useless. But you get it all the time. It's always with you. I hate to say, it's always with like young posh boys. Always the same people that do it. But it's good to be aware to not be that person, because It just destroys the confidence of young people.
Yeah,
Absolutely
yeah.
destroys them. If you're first play and you're like, I don't know, this is good. I don't know what you think. And you're like, well, I just think this. They're like, oh my God, this person thinks I'm shit.
Yeah.
The goal is to make people do the clearest version of their project. That's the goal, I think. Yeah.
So another question here then, and then if you've any more questions, just do pile them in, because I'm conscious we of the time. But with a show like Jumper Factory, where the story derives from interview and real life experience, how do you formulate a script from the research process?
Yeah, I think this is really important. I mean, like, I had a minor breakdown about 3 breakdowns. I keep talking like I've had several breakdowns, but I did have like a crisis of confidence a few years ago. And I was like, I don't really know why I'm writing, because I was living in London. I was just like every other sort of middle class white guy writing plays. I was like, what's my use in any of this conversation? So I started making that work with real people, and like, I learned so much, because I was like, look, take the ego out of it and say, I'm here to try and facilitate a conversation with real people, making it work for an audience. So the first thing you do is say, this isn't about me. This is like, if you want to speak, I can facilitate that as a structural thing, and you can do the play. But my job is to structure what you want to say into a play, and you can do it. So the process was like, basically, the Jumper Factory, went to prison, had like a bit of time just playing games and getting to know them all and stuff. And about week 3 or 4, I was like, my question was like, if you could say something that you think would make your life easier, or ask a question that you think would make your life easier, what would that question be? I didn't put any pressure on me, so I'd go and think about it, and we'll chat about it in a few weeks. And then we had a big conversation about it, and then I had like individual conversations with all of them, and the variations were nearly all the same variations of, I find it really hard to be here because I have to be macho, be masculine all the time, and I can't say I'm scared. And I was like, that's such a useful conversation to have with other prisoners, surely. And they were like, yeah, I mean, like, we all said that, then obviously we fucking find it so much easier. So that was the idea of the play. It was like, how can we make a play that's about admitting all the things we're scared about? So they basically articulated that, and they did it. And the second thing was like, we knew we were going to do it at the Young Vic. So it was like, how do we make that play something about prisons that's also useful for like a general outside audience to have? And it spoke a lot about like, a lot of us are just humans that are victims of circumstance or like, you know, societal failings. We're not like bad people. And one thing we want to change is that like, you'll give us a job interview. That's the one thing we want, is a job interview, and this to be taken seriously in a room. And I was like, okay. So the play came about those two things. It was like talking about being scared inside and like being taken, humanizing them on the outside. So that was a starting place again. We were like, that's what we're trying to achieve. And then we just like spoke to everyone individually about like what they want to talk about. And I tried to like put all their experience into a story. And the story is really small. I was like, how? Because obviously like it's hard because most of them can't act. So we were like, they're not actors, so they just got to say things. We were like, simple story. Someone comes in, has time in prison, goes out again. In their time in there, they experience these things whilst achieving the bigger goals. So that was like the story process. The form process is interesting because like when you work with real people, you've got to remember most of them can't act. So you've got to try and find a form that means they can just say things like with no acting required, and it tells a story and is still impactful. And the second thing is make a form where people can drop out and not turn up on the day. And it still works if you just plug someone else in their place. So that's kind of how we got there, structurally, formally, contently. But the big thing being that like your job is to write plays isn't about you; it's about serving them speaking, and your job is to just dramatize it so they can speak. If that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. That in many respects, and Jenny may correct me here, but it answers quite a lot of what the next question is what are the first steps for devising writing script when working with community groups? But this says, and in particular with young people, do you have to tailor the process? You mentioned ego early on, and ego isn't something that necessarily just disappears with time, but also there are different things at play when you're working with younger people. That potentially you're at in your life at the moment, if you're working with a group of peers, all of sort of similar age, and you've got a similar understanding. Do you have to tailor what you do? Are there specific steps that you take when you're working with a group, such as the National Youth Theatre piece?
Yeah, I do a lot of work with young people. And I think like it's at its best when you go, let's meet them and see what we want to talk about and make a show together. That's really useful. That works always awesome. I've done one where the director was like, no, don't write my play and turn up on day one with a play. And I was like, okay. They're going to fucking rinse me.
Okay.
So I did it. show was, it wasn't shit. It was just unfelt. Like the kids were just doing a play, and I was like, it was kind of stuff I cared about. It was like at the time I was like 28-year-old. Was in London, in like Islington, and I was like, some 20-year-old fucking white Scouse fellas coming and written a play without me, a bunch of black kids in Islington. I was like, this is fucking ridiculous. I was like, this is like on so many levels, a massive failure. And I was really embarrassed about it, actually, to be honest. But these things happen. But the best stuff I've done, like with the National Theatre, the connection thing, I had an idea of like where I sit in my life and where they sit in their life, and how we meet in the middle, and how having that conversation would be useful for both of us, and also listing them to talk to their families and teachers and friends about how their life could be easier if they talked about it. And that was really special, I think. I was really, really, really buzzing about that. With the NYT, it was a similar process in that I was like, I get hung up on this shit. I fucking know that young Scouse lads do as well. Where's the middle point for us to meet on this? And that's not with that.
In that devising process then, when you're taking and you're working with the group, do you take their words, do you take their ideas, or do you hear what they're saying as an idea and put voice to that, or are there certain people who just speak to you because they've got such a character that you want to sort of take that person? Or
for me, it depends. I've never done verbatim, but I have definitely outright borrowed lines people have said and put them in characters' mouths, 100%. Some people are more interesting than writers, always. Always more insightful and poetic than I am at my laptop on my own. You know, like with the National Connections thing, I was doing this thing where I made a big list. Part of the show was like, there's a provocation that says, now say a list of all the things that make you happy. And this kid just went getting in a tent and doing it up from the inside. And I was like, fucking hell, that's absolutely genius. Of course, like I would never have come up with that in my life. Never. You just epitomized what it is to be like cozy and homely and like near people you love, like touch with Nate. Yeah, I don't know. But yeah, no, I don't do verbatim. I definitely borrow things. Characters. Oh no, actually, I should talk about this because I think there's a really important conversation about ethics. Like when you're doing work with real people, like with the Jumper Factory, obviously there's some things you can't do. You can't talk about people's real life stories because they're in prison, could affect their parole hearings, blah, 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 blah. So you can't ever like actually dramatize real people because you don't want to put people on the spot. A lot of the time people want to do work that's like they're hiding behind the work, but really talking about themselves. If you know what I mean? Like I think if you like start to say, if I dramatized a person and made a play about them and they didn't know about it, that would be fucking weird. So like I think really, really careful about like actually using real people's stories. Because it's not fair on them, I think, is the main thing. They may say they want it to happen, but you know, it's another thing turning up at theatre and seeing 100 people there watching their life, watching them expose their parents' shortcomings or whatever, you know.
Yeah, I've been in the audience for certain experiences like that, and it can feel it crosses a line sometimes, especially when it's with younger people. When you're in the midst of writing, you spoke about observing people and you sort of borrow lines from people. When you're in the midst of writing something, is it easier to draw those things? Do those things come to you a little more readily? You observe life in a different way than when you're not writing, or do you always feel that you're observing life in a particular way? You might have a notebook where you jot down a line and then that might then lead to an idea.
I wish I did that more, you know. I constantly have like conversations when I'm drunk and like, that's fucking amazing. And then I'm like, what's that thing? Happens all. I really wish I've got to do that more. I'm just not organized enough to do that. But I will say, like, one thing I found really hard in this coronavirus thing is that like, I feel so detached from talking to people. Mm-hmm. I feel like the world doesn't really exist, really. Like my relationships and human relationships don't really exist. So fun is hard to write because I'm not having much fun. So I don't feel very fun. I'm not really having much banter with my mates or anything like so. And I feel like I realize how much I feed off the world.
Okay.
And I realize how much I feed off like my social interactions, my friends and my family, and how much that really everything I write is the people I experience my time with.
Okay.
You know, really.
Well, that was the final question, actually. What has your work been like during lockdown? Have you worked? Has it been? Has it reflected your mood? Are we going to see a darker side?
I've been really lucky. I've been doing some like screen stuff. So it's been a bit, and it's like stuff that I've already done the work on. It's just a bit more technical. So I've kind of been doing that, and that's been fine. But I've just like got this place, the thing I'm doing at the minute, where like technically it works, but it doesn't feel lived or fun. And I know that's because I'm not having fun or living.
Yeah.
You know? And like, I don't know how I'm going to get there until I just let go and just like say, I can't do this until the world resumes again. Like physically, like, yeah, it's hard, man. I found it personally really hard. I've not even thought about theatre during this.
Yeah.
I've not even thought about it. Well, I've thought about it, but not written anything because I don't know, man. I don't, so many things. I just don't know what I'd write about. I don't know what would be useful. I don't know what theatre's going to look like when this is over. Like, you know.
Well, this is it, and I think you're in. People are in really similar circumstances to you. I think someone was saying quite early on that we're not working through a pandemic; we're living through a pandemic and having to juggle work as well and things like that. So actually, I think there's a sense of getting through this, being conscious of what's coming, living for the moment as we can, as best as we can within our circumstances, because it's tough for people financially as well, but a sense of, and emotionally, and then balancing everything. But I think when we come through the other side as well, which hopefully we will do soon, that there'll be an opportunity to do the writing then, or to do the creative practice at that point. So
I hope so. I really miss it, man. I'm really missing it. I'm really missing theatre.
I think people are the same, missing going to your plays as well and going to other people's productions. So
yeah, 100%. And like, yeah, being in a room with other people, what a privilege that was.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
You know,
it will return at some point though. Yeah, absolutely will.
I really hope so. Well, I'm sure it will.
So any other quick tips, anything that you feel, I wish I'd said that, or not at all?
I guess the thing, actually, the best thing that one thing I really loved was like, I went to a workshop years ago with Grayson Perry, and someone said like, how do you get unstuck? And he said, I've got one question, which is like, how would I do this?
Okay.
Brilliant. It's like, you know, we spend so much time trying to be good, trying to be like excellent, but like actually we should try and like be ourselves. That's the whole point, you know? And like, I think that was just like mind blowing to me. I was like, oh fuck, of course I'm writing about what I care about and like in the way that I want to see it and do it. Of course that's it. Of course that's it. And like,
it's authenticity, isn't it?
That's all we've got. You know, we can't spend our whole life trying to be someone else. All we can, as an artist or as a person, all we can do is saying, look, like, I care about this. This is the way I see the art form. Those two things together is what I am. Let's make that.
Yeah.
What else would you make? What we do, we get in our heads, we're like, I've got to be like Rob Ike. I've got to be like da-da-da. I've got to be like, that must be as madly informative as Carol Church. Like, actually, she's just a product of her world in the same way you are. She's got her reference points in the same way you do right now, just that hers were in the 70s and living in Sloane Square and being whatever. Like, you here now. Who are you?
We're all of equal value. There isn't one person higher or lower. We're all the best. So therefore,
100%. Like, I know we're running out of time, but like the idea of art is that like you as a building curates a season of various voices and perspectives, right? Like, and all those things are equal. We're not looking to celebrate our big highlighting thing. We're saying, look, here's everything.
Yeah. Everyone's
equal. Everyone's got a voice. Just got to find out who we are first. That's the first question.
That's it. Yeah. but also, as we find out who we are, it can make for some great art as well. So there's some lovely comments coming through saying thanks. I'd like to extend my thanks to you then, Luke, ever so much for all this. I'm going to hand over to Rach, who's just going to finish off with a couple of little bits. Here she comes. And also to say that the person that you can't see on here is Rachel Palmer, who's been absolutely pivotal to these happening alongside Rach as well. So there are others coming up that Rach is going to mention, but if you want to join us, and Luke, if you wish to join us as well, please do. But thanks ever so much. That's been really insightful, but also, as well as telling us a little bit about your career journey, it's been really helpful to learn those tips and tricks as well for getting things started in the creative process. So, and in different guises. And thank you for your honesty as well. Really, really appreciate it. So over to you, Rach.
Anytime.
Thank you so much, Luke. That was amazing. Really inspiring. I'm just going to quickly sign off now, just to let you know that for anyone on the call who would like to listen to this back, digest it, read some notes, we will be sending this out to you in the next couple of days. Like I said, we'll also be sending accessible versions, so please feel free to pass on to your colleagues and your friends who feel might benefit. There'll be a recording and there'll be a transcript that you can share. The whole purpose of the series that we're running is to really get to know and serve the artists in our community much better, not just through lockdown, but to build this relationship now for when things do return to some kind of normal. If they do in fact do return to the way they were, this might be the perfect opportunity to change things up. So I'm going to quickly drop in the chat now just a link to a web page we've made on our website. It's incredibly vague. It's just called How Can We Help? Use it as therapy, use it if you've got an idea, just drop in any thoughts that you've got. If you're scared about how the industry's going, just speak to us, because we're probably feeling really similar things, and it'd be great to have that dialogue with you all. So please do use that webpage. Yeah, and very quickly, so these are weekly sessions. Next week we've got Matt Zia, who has worked at the Evan Playhouse, who's worked at Nottingham Actors Touring Company. I'm probably missing so many. Royal Exchange, that's it. That's probably 4 of about 400 places he's worked. He's an incredibly inspiring guy, director, artistic director, DJ. So we'd really recommend you joining us for that. Then on Friday next week, we've got our very own Gordon, who will be in conversation with Home in Manchester's head of programming, Kevin. So that's going to be a real chance to kind of get to know what it's like to program different kinds of spaces in different cities. And then the following week, we've got Jess Tom, who some of you might know from Tourette's Hero, who again is absolutely inspiring. So again, we'd really recommend you joining us for that. But yeah, that is the sales plug at the end of this. So thank you so much for joining us. Thank you so much, Luke. Like I said, really incredible, and we really appreciate you giving up your time to do